I want to interject. I'm sure you're sensing the look on my face. Like, what the F, really, honestly. I can't help but think that there's some, and I don't know, the true facts surrounding this, but I can't help but think that there's some element of intentional disrespect that comes from that. Hello and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the modern sex talk. So, in my clinical practice, I've come across many parents lately who have been very perplexed about how to have the sex talk with their kids. It looks very different than it did in our childhood and our adolescence because the landscape is completely different. I read something just the other day that said that dating is now obsolete, and what kids, well, I hate saying this, kids, teens, whatever you want to call them, are gravitating towards are casual hookups. Developmentally speaking, emotionally speaking, this does not set them up for the future as far as developing strong, healthy relationships. But this is the world that we're living in. So, Oren, tell me some thoughts that you have on this off the bat.
Well, for those who don't know, I've been teaching the psychology of human sexuality for over 20 years, about 100 times. So I have, and it's not, the students are anywhere from, let's say, 18 to 78. So I have a wide range of students. I have my clinical practice has lots and lots of people dealing with relationship and sexual issues. And so I have seen over the last 20 years, well, over the last many years, but 20 years professionally, some real shifts in the dynamics and the nature of relationships and dating and so on. But also what's being consistent is most people on a fundamental level still do want the same thing. The problem is what they're seeing and what they're being told they should have or they can have is different from those fundamental wants and needs, which I guess we'll get into today.
Yeah. And some of the main factors, and certainly not all of them, but the access that teens, specifically boys, have to pornography, that has certainly changed and increased. I read just the other day as well that the average 12-year-old, almost all of the average 12-year-olds have come across pornography. That is, very eye-opening because 12 is quite young. And again, developmentally speaking, I don't know if they're ready to be experiencing such things. The CDC does a study every few years about teen risk-taking behavior. And what I read was that from the 80s and 90s to now, interestingly, it's one of these things where it seems like it's good news, but when you read into it a bit more, it's really not. Fewer teens are actually engaging in sex. So in the 80s and 90s, it was about 50% of teens, whereas nowadays in the 2010s and onwards, it's about 30%. But the change isn't that, kids are just following the rules a bit more or being a little bit more virtuous in their choices, I guess we could say. It's actually that they are engaging in more sexual behavior, such as things like oral sex. Looking at that as something, it's less intimate than kissing, some say. So it's one of these things where when parents speak to me about this and they're, utterly horrified, I work with teens as well, and I hear the casual nature and the casual approach that they have to these things. I think that something really needs to change, and we're here to help with the conversation that parents are having about sex. Like I said from the get-go here, it's not the same talk that we would have had as kids if we even had it.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I am very specific when I talk to my patients about these things. And in class, by the way, because I tell students, I say the word sex. It depends how I say it. I often say sex is meaningless. Okay, and they look at me. I go, what I mean is the word sex. Because if you said to someone, "Did you have sex?" what they assume you mean by sex maybe something very different from what you assumed. It's the same with hookups. And it's funny because when hookups started becoming more popular in the public vernacular, I would ask my students, I'd say, so what is a hookup? And I loved watching their look. They're thinking like, hey, grandpa, you don't even know what that is, right? And I'd smirk back and I'd say, No, I know what it is. You don't know what it is because I know that everyone has a different definition of what it is, right? So, and then I show them the research that clearly shows that what people think. Again, if you ask 100 people, what is a hookup? Some will say, well, it has to involve, penetration. Others could say, it's kissing. Others say just hanging out. Like there's different definitions. So when it comes to sex, and this is not anything new. This has been around from the beginning of research, even because they would say, for example, only 25% of women have an orgasm while having sex, or frequently or regularly have an orgasm. Okay, and sometimes it'd be clumsy. Say only 25% of women have an orgasm during sex. And by the way, for those who are watching, we didn't give an NSFW warning because I teach this and I do it in my clinical practice all the time. I talk about it like
it's safe for our work.
It's safe for our work for sure, and it's essential. And so everyone might not feel the same, but I sometimes have to stop myself even in therapy because I say to people, well, just so you know, because of my background and having been raised in a sex store, basically, because my mother opened up, Canada's first sex store. So I have a different take on this. So I might be saying some words really casually that some people go, oh my God, I can't hear it. But, we're professionals, we're adults. So, and if anyone feels uncomfortable talking or hearing us talk about it, how are you going to do with your teen or your adolescent or child?
Exactly.
So anyway, so what I'm saying is about the word sex, the research was unclear. So for example, only 25% of women have an orgasm when they have sex. Well, is that always have an orgasm? Is it usually, sometimes? Number one. And what is sex? Is it, penile vaginal penetration? Is it oral sex? Is it masturbation? Right. So it took many years for the researchers, and I would astound my students, I still do, showing them some of the research. I go, these are the so-called experts, and the terminology they're using, the questions they're asking, their methodology is so flawed that anybody who has any experience with sexual matters would look at them and go, how the hell did this go through a pilot project? How did this go through all these meetings where someone didn't say, excuse me, that's a really dumb question, or that's the wrong way of asking it, or no one's going to know what you mean. So, or they have different definitions. So this is a problem that has plagued research for many, many, many years in the field and has plagued the experts. And once again, getting back to what we're talking about, it will make it difficult for a parent to have these discussions if they think I'm talking one thing and my child's talking another. So what I started to say at the beginning was, I've had some patients who will tell me, like the way they talk, it sounds like they've never had any sex whatsoever, any sexual relations at all. And then I find out later on, oh yeah, they've hooked up, they've had intercourse, they've done whatever, had oral sex with, dozens of people. Okay. But their terminology was, well, it wasn't in a relationship, so it didn't count, kind of thing. I never had a steady relationship. Okay, well, fine. But you still had sex, or however you want to define it. So the point is, parents have to be very mindful that any word that they use could mean something totally different from the child. And it might sound strange. So in my sex class, I say to students, I go, I know this sounds so, I'm trying to think of the best word here, but it's so clinical.
Like crass?
No, not actually clinical? The opposite. Okay. Clinical. They sound so clinical and sterile was the word I was looking. It sounds so sterile, but I will say sexual intercourse or penile vaginal intercourse, because again, sex can mean so many different things. And if we're not talking about, let's say, heterosexual relations, then, sex can mean something totally different as well. So I will be very specific. I will say oral sex, penile vaginal intercourse, whatever the case may be. So parents have to also be mindful of the terminology.
Yeah. And to that point, I guess before we even get into, specific strategies and things to be aware of, I think that it's incredibly important for parents to get comfortable with that terminology themselves and hearing it and discussing it, because it's not going to happen otherwise, right? It's not the days of we, come up with these, cute little names for things. No, that's not going to fly. That's not helpful. That's not educational. Secondly, I think that whether parents want to accept or not, their teenagers are having sex. Johnny and Susie are not the pure little children that you think that they may be. Research tells us that, and again, developmentally speaking, this is a time when their hormones are racing, their bodies are changing, and it's completely normal for them to engage in sex. So that's a really important thing for parents to understand and accept from the get-go as well. And what I want to focus a little bit of time on here is the fact that there are biological differences between boys and girls, and the way that parents have the talk with their daughters versus their sons is going to be different. And perhaps this is controversial given, the landscape at the moment where, we seem to think that boys and girls are the same and equal, that simply is not so. So one of the things that I think we should start with is the brain. The way in which the brain experiences arousal is different with boys and girls. The goal of sex is different with boys and girls. And the way that they interpret sex is very different with boys and girls. It's, I guess, long story short, it's different.
Right. Now, we have to be clear here. We're talking on average, for most cases, when we talk about the psychological component. Neurologically, yes, males and females are different. I know that's controversial in today's day and age. Right. And I know, Malini, and we've talked about this, before. You come from a more conservative background than I do. I am very, very liberal. Again, I was raised in a sex store. But when people hear me talk about these things, I'm going to sound like some, old conservative, person talking about this, but it's just facts. It's reality. Yeah. And for many, many years, especially females, have been sold, let's say, a lie. And the problem is we've talked many times about black and white thinkers. So the lie is that, hey, sex for you is exactly the same as it is for males, or you can do all these things and still have a healthy, let's say, outlook. Healthy physical outlook and so on, like it's totally the same, et cetera, and or you should want these things or you shouldn't want that. Well, everybody's different. So being told that I should be a certain way or I should feel a certain way, it might not fit in with my needs, with how I process things, again, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, physically, interpersonally. Right. And we're going to talk about that, how it is really doing a lot of damage. If I can just do a call back to a previous episode, I was saying that the greatest scam, because you're talking about access to pornography, we talked about it before. It can't be highlighted enough. The fact is that when children who are not mentally, psychologically, emotionally, or socially developed enough to deal with the intricacies of porn and, quite frankly, the harmful narratives of most porn, when they're exposed to it at such a young age, it does damage. It doesn't make them more informed, doesn't make them more savvy, and it doesn't make them better self-agents or more self-efficacious. It's harmful. People have to understand that. And as you say, to think that kids haven't been exposed to some form of porn, you're lying to yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about females first. And one of the main differences that we know research tells us about females and sexuality. So generally speaking, when it comes to sex, females, they are looking for intimacy. Conversely, with males, and this isn't to say that the typical man does not look for intimacy, but the goal of sex is generally to satisfy an urge and to experience that pleasure and satisfaction. One of the key differences too is with the brain and the way that the brain is perceiving and processing it, women's brains tend to have a higher release of and experience of oxytocin, which is estrogen dependent. So this is a female difference, which again connects to that desire for intimacy. Conversely, with men, it is, and boys and males, it is testosterone dependent, which is also linked to aggression and urge. This sounds funny, but sometimes, the urge for sex with males is as strong as having to go pee. So it's not like, and I think the old saying is, what is it? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Yep. And this is one of the big differences here. And, as a side note, in couples therapy, one of the biggest things that and I'm sure you see as far as the mismatch in desire comes from a lack of understanding of those key differences.
Right. And again, I want to say it, we'll say it a few times, but people have to understand we're talking averages. So yes, of course, there are a number of women who have a very high sex drive, or sex is just, it's a thing. It's nothing else. Okay. Like, yes. Yeah. And there are many men who do want that emotional intimacy. I've got many patients who, like, more so than their female partners, want that. Right. So again, we're talking averages, and those averages are usually neurologically dependent, and it's evolutionarily based. So again, to deny this is to deny basic biology, basic reality, and so on. Yeah. So nothing we're saying, we're not shaming people. We're not slut shaming or sex shaming or anything like that. No. We're just talking facts. And if you don't like the facts, well, find good, solid, credible research to disprove them.
Yeah. And this is the thing, to echo what you said there, of course, there's always going to be variance and differences, but we're looking at, what the science says and what the science tells us. But when we look at these differences between males and females, and again, how parents are to have this talk with their children, it's really important to also understand what the social factors are that are surrounding teenage sexuality. Nowadays, I feel so old saying this, but nowadays, and perhaps back in my day, I don't know, but generally speaking, teen boys and girls are hooking up not because of physical attraction, but often because of the social status of the partner that they're seeking out. So that's wild to me that, it's very little to do on both ends about sexual satisfaction and desire in many cases.
Right. And a few things. First of all, even though we're talking about research, I want to be very clear. My classes, I spend a lot of time poking holes in so much of that bad research. So Malini and I are saying this with the understanding that the research is not perfect. Okay. There are many problems with the methodology, the interpretation, and so on. So, but having said that, if you have enough studies, if you've done enough research or looking at the different studies, you see things that look like pretty solid patterns or trends. So yes. So the motives for sex, right? That's really important. I'm going to ask, it's a bit of a loaded question, okay? But I just want to put this out there. And if I said this in a previous episode, please let me, stop me, okay? The bottom line was that so many female students would say that, and again, I won't give the whole question. I'm just saying what the answer was, okay? That so many of them said that if they were having a one-night stand and the partner was doing something that just wasn't pleasurable. Did we talk about this before, or?
We did, but I think it's relevant. And we talked about it in the context of females feeling liberated in their sexuality. Okay. So we did talk about it, but we talked about it more with respect to adults. So I think it bears repeating.
Okay. Yeah. So these are adults. These are professional women. These are accomplished women who were saying that if they were with a partner, like a one-night stand, and it wasn't enjoyable, they would just basically say nothing and hope the guy finishes quickly, and then they can, get the hell out. And one of my students, spoke up and said, he was a gay male. And he said, "Excuse me, I don't want to be rude, but if you're having a one-night stand, what is the purpose if not to have pleasure? So why would you sacrifice that just because it's too much of a bother, or you don't want to get into an argument, or you don't want to wound the person's ego or something like that?" And these are, again, accomplished professional women saying this. So a young a teen girl, she in most cases is going to feel far less capable and have far less of a belief that I deserve to be able to express my desires, my needs, my wants, or displeasures, with even a stranger. And so it's important for parents, if you are going to have this talk, to say the number one thing you should be teaching your child is self-agency. Speak up for yourself. And that could involve saying, "Hey, I don't want to do this," or "I'm not ready for this," and everything. I know, again, we sound like old parents here. Well, at least one of us is an old parent. You're a young parent. So, but the point is, these are core factors that the person has to be comfortable with if they're going to have any form of healthy sexuality.
And absolutely. And I think, with so many things in life, but especially in this realm, it is so vitally important for parents to teach their child how to advocate for themselves, how to speak up for themselves, how to say no, right? And I feel like a commercial from the 80s, just say no, but truly, that is an incredibly important tool to have. And to the point that you were making earlier, what I read recently is that actually, to a couple of the points that you just made, that female teens are often doing it because they feel socially they have to. The boys won't think that they're, cool or acceptable if they don't. But also they're deriving very little pleasure from it. Oftentimes, I mentioned earlier, there's a higher degree of or higher frequency of oral sex happening, but it's not reciprocal. Right. It's, females performing this on boys. They feel awful about it. They feel dirty about it after, but they do it because they feel they, quote unquote, have to. Right. And that's actually, it's gross. It's terrible.
Yeah, and that's huge. And you said this earlier about for a lot of young women, males as well, that kissing is more taboo, more risky because it's more intimate than oral sex. Yeah. And again, as someone who's taught human sexuality 100 times over the past 20 something years, I saw the change both in the research, but also in the discussions I was having with thousands of people, right? That it was a clear change. And I'll tell you right now, I've had so many women, sometimes, usually they're full on women, where they say what you said, but minus the insight. So what they said was, I blew a bunch of guys in junior high school or in high school. And at the time, See, a lot of them, they were able to rationalize it, and the power of the unconscious, right? The power of defense mechanisms. So they told themselves, I am empowered. I am a sexually liberated young woman because I can have oral sex and I'm choosing who I'm having it with. And they lied to themselves. And later came the shame and the disgust and everything. But at the time, in that era of, blowjobs left, right, and center, they were just suppressing and repressing the reality of what it was doing to them. But later on, they say they realized that's not liberating. My boyfriend was, basically having his friends come over and I have to blow them, or I wasn't really choosing them. I never said no. So how selective is that? And then they will admit, yeah, I did it because I got a self-esteem boost, or I did it for, for street cred and stuff like that, or I felt pressured. And a lot of time that self-esteem boost, which by the way, equally for male and female. That's one thing that's really not a sex difference. Depending on the study, you'll find different results. But many, many people will say, yes, sex, it's an esteem boost, and if you think about it, I am supposedly increasing my self-esteem by degrading myself. Right? Non-reciprocal oral sex or whatever is being recorded, it's being shared, I'm being coerced, whatever else, but somehow that's, elevating my self-esteem. This is the kind of contradictory thinking and realities that parents have to know is happening among many of these young people.
Yeah. And at the risk of rehashing one of our most recent episodes, we talked about this as far as, young women in their 20s and 30s. But yeah, and I think it's absolutely relevant to this topic too, because it's obviously starting somewhere. It starts in, their earliest sexual interactions where, it's this guise of, female empowerment, where in reality, it absolutely is not. These sexual encounters that they have, like you mentioned, I'm naive, I suppose I'll say, because I hear these stories again from clients, from parents, that, I don't know how else to put it other than these girls are being passed around, like you said, going from one guy to the next. And, parties that they attend, that's oftentimes the activity of choice. It just blows my mind, no pun intended. But speaking of parties here, alcohol is a huge factor that's involved in these too. And again, key difference between boys and girls here is the reason that they're drinking in these sexual encounters. So oftentimes boys are seeking out alcohol because it helps with, performance anxiety, premature ejaculation, loosening them up and helping them get into whatever it is that they're about to frankly receive. Whereas females tend to report that it has more to do with numbing their emotions and not wanting to experience, again, this disgust and this shame that we're talking about. So for parents, in having this conversation, it's not just about sex, it's about going to these parties, it's about consuming alcohol and being abundantly aware of the fact that, you may be encouraged to or coerced into doing these things. But if you're drinking, first of all, it's going to wear down your ability to think clearly and advocate for yourself and say no. And secondly, if people are doing it to numb those emotions and to numb out what they know are going to be negative emotions, maybe take a step back and think about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Why are you doing that in the first place?
Yeah.
Yeah. And now one thing that parents have to be very careful about, you have no credibility in your kid's eye, right? What do you know, parent? It's so hard. So, you have to make sure that you're up to date on the information. Find out what the kids are, like, what do they expose themselves to? Most likely it's TikTok, which, it's a fountain of misinformation. It's not a fountain, it's a waterfall of misinformation. So, you want to make sure that you're using language that's, accurate. Sorry, not accurate. What's the right word here? It's in common use among, with your kids.
Relevant and current language, I guess is what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even though in class I'll say penile vaginal intercourse, if you say that to your child, they're going to fall over laughing. So doing that and also being careful, because here's the thing. The kid wants not all kids, but many kids, they want to be able to poke holes. Either it's to deny what's going on. Like, it's not me. I know it's some friend. Some will just say, no, that's crazy. It's not happening. Others will go, yeah, I know some of my friends are like that, but it's not me. Okay. Others will try to say, other kids want to just show how out of touch the parent is, clueless, whatever. And I got to tell you, one thing that happened, I'm going to say about 15 years ago, it's between 15 and 20 years ago. And it was on TV shows and everything like that. But this is an example of what happens if a parent sees something doesn't inform themselves well enough, and they just go off the handle, which is about, like I said, 15 to 20 years ago. I'm trying to remember because I gave a big talk, and someone asked me about this, and it was rainbow parties. I'm not sure if you're aware of rainbow parties. Yeah.
I remember learning about those in undergrad, actually, so some time ago.
Right. And the fact is, though, they weren't really happening. So in case anyone's wondering, and it may have happened in one or two places, okay, but it sounded like, and there was news stories, like all 12-year-old kids are doing this. And so there were two factors going on. There was rainbow parties, and then there were bracelets, okay? I don't know if you remember that as well. At the same time. Right. Yeah. So just for anyone who doesn't know, it's funny because, again, I would ask thousands of students over the years, have you heard of these things? Some did, many hadn't. And sometimes it was their own generation. Like they had gone to junior high at that time and they hadn't even heard it. So it wasn't as widespread as it was being made to be, seem in the media. But the idea with rainbow parties was that a guy would go to a party and the whole idea was he'd try to get as many blowjobs as he could from girls, and they'd all have different colored lipsticks. So it would be like a rainbow on his penis, which if it were actual, real oral sex, it wouldn't be a rainbow party. It would be a smudge party. Okay. It would be right. Because it wouldn't look like nice little lines like that. But that was the whole idea. Everyone was having that. And the other one was that these girls were all wearing these different colored bracelets, and the different colored bracelet would indicate what they had done or what they're into and so on. And when they actually interviewed these girls, they were like saying, nah, it's just fashionable. I don't actually do this kind of stuff. Like a lot of the girls were saying, they're just doing it because they knew everyone else was wearing it. Or again, it was just to fit in or something like that. But it wasn't actually happening. So if you come to your kid with these scary stories about what's going on, and the kid can just laugh you off, you've lost credibility. So just be mindful, right? Don't go over the top, right? Be casual, come slowly, tentatively, right? Ask lots of questions. Don't just go bada, bada, bada. You're not attacking them. You're finding out from them what they think about these things, what they know, and so on, and trying to foster a healthy discussion. And if you did it perfectly, I'd be surprised if more than half of the parents were able to get any types of answers from their kids, right? So you're not expecting it to go well. It's it's going to take time and everything. That's an embarrassing conversation, and kids often don't even have it with their friends or with a partner, let alone with a parent. So if you aren't able to do it yourself, either find really good videos that talk about these things that teach self-empowerment, right? Or if there's someone else that who can talk to them, who has more credibility, maybe a sibling or something like that, right? But it's not what you say that's relevant; it's what people hear. So you need to make sure that the source of the information is something that kids are going to listen to and actually benefit from. And those videos, there are good videos out there. I doubt they're on TikTok. Maybe they are. I'm just very biased against TikTok, but there are good videos. Ask your friends, ask the experts, find somebody who really will connect with them. Not to one old person and a younger person here, but maybe adolescents and stuff like that. They might connect better as well.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you were saying before about the changes that you've seen over the 20 some odd years that you've been teaching, because that's really fascinating to me that you were able to kind of witness that change. And I touched on it earlier that one of the biggest changes is the abundant access to online pornography. Yep. So I certainly think that that's one of the culprits. And, regarding that, there's some evidence that suggests that teen boys would actually prefer to engage in masturbation to online porn versus courting an actual girl, because it's easier, it's quicker. But there's, some obvious huge problems that come along with that in terms of, again, future relationships and not being able to properly engage in and facilitate the development of those. And secondly, there's a development of some real unrealistic expectations as far as what sex actually is. But that aside, I want to talk a bit more about the changes that you noticed over the years.
Well, the porn part, and this maybe you'll let me know whether we talk about it today or in a different episode. There is some really important information and misinformation about that. And the experts disagree as well. So at some point, I think we should talk about the actual impact, the neurological, psychological, and interpersonal impacts of pornography, modern day pornography. So maybe we'll talk about that at another date. Okay. So as far as the changes, yes, the number one, the biggest change. And when I was telling this to colleagues, older colleagues especially, it blew their mind when I talked about the casualness with which people have oral sex. Because back in the days, it was considered such a taboo act. And one of my colleagues who was a fair bit older than I was, he was saying only the, what it was called, like the rebels and the bad kids and the ones with tattoos used to do that in the old days. But that was many, many, many years ago. Okay. That it just became such, thanks to porn, Okay, it became just such a banal act. It's a nothing. Okay, and I think that's the biggest one as far as like the changes that we saw, and then the corresponding with the kissing. Again, this was actually it's funny because it was in Pretty Woman. All right, where a lot of people heard this, but it was within the context of a prostitute, where Julia Roberts says to Richard Gere that she will never kiss a client because it's far more intimate. The kissing is intimate, right? And that was in a movie, and it's not like all these kids were watching Pretty Woman, right? But it just got to the point that yes, kissing does now seem to be such a much more intimate act than oral sex. So that's one. The other thing that has come about, and this is really concerning, it's a change, is because of the access to porn. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not using scare tactics. I am saying A, the research shows this, and B, anecdotally, I've heard many people saying this, that men more than ever before feel that it's okay. And now we're talking heterosexual relations. So I just want to be clear on that because, we can talk about male, male, female, female at some point. But in heterosexual relations, men are far more likely today to engage in behaviors that without consent than you would expect. And if I can just say a few, it's going to be a bit graphic if that's okay, but I think people need to understand this. So again, research has shown this, reports like people who've spoken with many people. And again, in my own practice, I've heard this. So one of them, and you have to imagine this, they're saying on a first date. Again, I'm going to go down the list here. This is one. So a lot of people are okay with this because at a certain level, it's not that bad. But let's say spanking somebody. Okay. If, given the, the pain, with the pain and pleasure circuitry is close in the brain, and with the endorphins that get, that get fired up, and your system gets on fire, like, you're fueling up the limbic system. So a bit of pain can be very pleasurable. However, if the person's not expecting it, right, this could be very, it can be disconcerting or can throw them off. B, if it's too hard, now you've crossed the line. And how does a person know if this guy's rough or he's had other women who've never said anything? He goes really hard, right? And C, just the fact that it's an act of intimacy just to hit somebody in a way that's not intended to hurt, right? Or to hurt them.
Well, there has to be a level of trust, right? And if they're doing that in the first interaction, that's obviously going to cause some problems.
Exactly. And that's the part that, again, it crosses the line. So, but more men are doing that. So that's one thing. Second one is, and I'm trying to think of how to order this. Okay. Another one is choking. Now, again, same idea. Choking can be really amazing if it's done with trust. It's got to be the trust and, of course, consent. Everything I'm saying, just please assume that I'm saying it has to be consensual. And these are not consensual if they are non-standard activities that the person didn't say, okay to previously, and then the person just does it. So on a first date, imagine you're having sex with a guy and he starts choking you. A basic stranger is choking you. That's terrifying. So the choking, that was just the fact that they do this. Okay. Another one, that they tried to have anal sex without asking. Okay. So the woman consented to penile vaginal. That was okay. But then suddenly he starts trying to penetrate her anally. Okay. And I'm not talking gentle probing, maybe with a finger to see her. Okay. Like they would actually try to, penetrate them with their penis. And then the other one, and I don't know, I know it's really graphic here, but I think this is so important. And this, I would say porn, 90 something percent of the people who do this, if not 100%, were influenced by porn. I don't want to put you on the spot. I always ask you questions, Mal, but I'm going to ask you, do you want to guess what this last part I'm going to say is? And I'd say 99 to 100% due to porn.
Let me think about this. Something overarching with unrealistic expectations of what it's actually like, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay. No, well, it's, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to tell you. Before I tell you, actually, I'm going to say one other thing, just one more. I'm not sure how much research shows this, but people call it stealthing. So a guy takes off the condom in the middle of the act. Either he doesn't put it on because they're both drunk or high. You mentioned alcohol before. All these behaviors are exponentially more likely if there are drugs or alcohol involved. And in many cases, there are. The research shows that with sexual assault as well. I think we're talking over 75% of cases will involve drugs or alcohol. With certain types of sexual assault, I should say. We're talking over 75% or unwanted, coerced, whatever. Studies show that. So, imagine all this happening. So either the guy says he's going to put on a condom and he doesn't, or he puts on the condom and takes it off in the middle, right? And I mean, this is sexual assault. It is actual sexual assault. I've had a number of patients who've had this. I've had students who said this. So that's terrible. right? Risk of pregnancy, risk of of sexually transmitted infection, and they don't like. Sometimes the woman finds out afterward because you think, well, how could she not know? Well, in the mix of all this craziness, especially if there's drugs or alcohol, it's very easy, or the condom tears, or the guy forgets, quote unquote. Like there's just it's so easy for these things to happen, and if a person doesn't feel that they have the right to have a voice, you're making it much more likely that it's going to happen, right? So, especially because if in the beginning, whether it's during the dating part, like, the non-sexual part, whether it's at the beginning or right beforehand, if someone is showing that she's not, she doesn't have a sense of confidence, true confidence, okay, that she's not, fully engaged and trying to get her needs met and so on, then it's going to make the person feel more like that they can take liberties with the person, right? So speaking of taking liberties, the final act, which it should blow your mind, and no pun intended, ejaculating on her face. Okay. I've lost count. I've literally lost count of the number of people who have told me that a guy, first date, whatever else like that, and just, ejaculate in her face. Bad enough in the mouth or in the face. Okay. And that's 100% due to, or almost 100% due to porn, because that wasn't a thing that long ago. Porn started with ejaculating outside the body. Some historians say it's because of the HIV epidemic. They were, at the time in the 80s. So they were trying to be safe. Sometimes they're saying it's a sign to show, hey, don't worry. I'm not, like whether it's for the actors themselves, the porn actors, or whether it was, as part of the script or, the film script or the psychological script saying, hey, don't worry. Like I'm not infecting you. There's no risk kind of thing, which is silly because you can still, infect anyway. But the point is, it started from that on the back, on the belly, on the breasts, and then it started going into the face. And that became, it's so common.
I want to interject. I'm sure you're sensing the look on my face. Like, what the F, really, honestly. I can't help but think that there's some, and I don't know, the true facts surrounding this, but I can't help but think that there's some element of intentional disrespect that comes from that. And that comes from excessive exposure to pornography. Yeah, that's what's on my mind at the moment, where all of this just seems to be some intentional degree of disrespect or assertion of aggression or control or something along those lines.
Okay, and here's where some of the experts will roll their eyes when I say this. But they have to understand, and I've said this, I've been interviewed, about these kinds of matters, sexual matters. And it's funny because with some of these people who've interviewed me, I've told them, I say, here's some experts you should talk to. And I'll give them a list of people. And I say, these people are going to say this, I promise you. And these people are going to say that. Okay. And there doesn't seem to be like a happy medium. And I've had reporters who've laughed and said, oh, actually, I already spoke to them. And they said exactly what you said. Okay. Like it was very black and white. I will tell students, I tell patients, I'm in the middle. I see both the black and the white and all the gray as well. So I want to be very clear here. I am not saying porn in of itself is bad. Porn can be, very useful. Porn can be exciting. There are many good potential elements of porn. The problem is much of the porn is bad. And its effects on people can be terrible neurologically and psychologically and interpersonally, as I said earlier. So I'm going to say a few things about this. And so anyone who thinks they know where I'm going, I hope they'll listen to the whole story, because it's not just going to be one or the other side. It's going to be both. Okay. So when it comes to, let's say, ejaculating on the face, and I've said this to so many people, you can't not see it in virtually every case. I'm going to tell you two exceptions afterward, but you can't not see it. As you say, it's aggression, it's marking territory, it's degrading, it's humiliating, it's dominance, right? I mean, that is a fact, because the context in which people first see it, the porn, in most cases, that's exactly what's happening, right? The woman's a passive recipient of this. And, and whether it's a professional film or even worse, if it's like an amateur film, like someone's, a personal recording, oftentimes you'll see a bunch of guys there and they're just degrading and humiliating the young woman, right? It's soul sucking, basically. And so that's the context in which people are seeing it. And I say, most of the guys who are going to ejaculate on a woman's face, they're not misogynists. They're just monkey see, monkey doing. That's what they saw. This is the script. So they think this is normal. And not all females who do this are these self-loathing, pathetic people without self-agency. They're just emulating what they're seeing. But the fact is, what they're seeing, that context, once again, is usually a person asserting his dominance over the woman and her truly being humiliated. So even if you don't think that that's what you're doing, psychologically, you're just repeating this context. So you are telling yourself on some level, yes, male, dominant, aggressive, marked territory, female, passive, recipient, being humiliated.
Right. And I want to interject here again, just to tie this back to our main topic of parents. This is what you need to understand about the problem about pornography is that monkey see, monkey do. Kids, teens, adults, frankly, are not learning the proper, actual, real, what could be a satisfying and fulfilling sexual experience. They don't learn what that actually looks like because they're seeing this and they're copying it. And I'm, going to make a bold statement here that I think that in large part, this comes from the fact that they're not having proper, robust conversations with their parents and learning about this beforehand. And is that going to, fix everything? Of course not. But I really, really want to emphasize that not talking about this stuff with your kids, that's where they're going to learn about it.
Exactly. And again, if you don't feel comfortable, if your kid doesn't feel comfortable, get them to watch certain videos where there are young women teaching, or whatever age women, teaching actual empowerment, telling them that the stuff that we're saying right now, right? They have to hear that because, again, think about it. If you keep going into the same behaviors over and over and over, and the behaviors are designed to humiliate, okay, to subjugate you, what do you think it does to you unconsciously? So I just want to say there were two. So I may have mentioned this before. I was writing a book many, many years ago, okay, on sex, and I got kind of shelved, but when it came to ejaculating on the face, I got to tell you, I spoke to so many couples, and I would hear every version of twisted reality where people were saying, "Oh, it's not this, it's not that," and in most cases, except for two, in every case except for two couples, I couldn't believe what they were saying. In the sense, I literally couldn't believe it. They were lying to themselves. It was quite clear. Okay, that might sound arrogant, but as a psychologist, I've worked with enough people where I can see where someone's trying to really rationalize and convince themselves. But there were two couples, totally independent of each other. They don't know each other at all. Okay, and each couple said the exact same thing with the same type of tone and demeanor. Okay, where I said, you know what? Now you've made an argument for ejaculating on the face. Okay. Now, before I get to that, a little bit of a teaser, let me say one of the things that people say, which is like if a guy says, for example, well, when I go down on my girlfriend, if she squirts, okay, I'm not thinking I'm being humiliated or whatever. I said, oh, okay. And are you on your knees? Is she holding you by the hair? Is she forcing your face into her clitoris? And I was going to say vulva, okay, into her vulva, and for and laughing while she's squirting in your face? No, right? It's not that. And it's the same with two men. If there are two men in a gay relationship, okay, and one guy is always ejaculating on the other guy in that same manner, then it's degrading. If you both do it, okay, and there's an understanding and everything, fine, then there isn't that imbalance. But these are factors that you have to be honest about. So the two couples, okay, the two couples where I really believed it was actually a positive thing in the relationship was because I'm not kidding you, they both said almost word for word the same thing. Number one, the guy didn't ask to do it. Number two, the female did. Okay. Number three, when she did ask, the guy was like, no, I don't want to, because that's degrading. Okay. Right. And then the fourth one, and this is the part, and they both said it so, almost word for word. Each woman said to her partner, I don't do this either normally. Now, whether they're telling the truth or not, I don't know. It seems sincere. They said, I normally don't do it because I do think it's degrading and so on. But because I actually trust and love you so much, I know that if you do it for me, this is taboo, it's dark, whatever. Okay, now it's no longer taboo because it's so common, but for them, it's taboo. So engaging in taboo acts with respect and not, robbing anyone of dignity, that can be a bonding moment. So the way that they both said that, both couples, and both partners seemed totally in accord with each other. There wasn't one person looking weird. They both were like, yeah, they were on board with that. And they didn't do it all the time. They did it a few times. And again, it was a sign of my trust for you and my love, because I know I can do something I would never do with anybody else and not feel bad about it. To me, that was empowering. And how often does that happen? Well, I don't know how many couples I spoke to and how many people, but it was 2 out of whatever. So it's very rare. But I just want to, that's a non-black and white version of that. And again, we're going to talk more about porn in other episodes, maybe a continuation of this. I just want people to know that I know I talked about it before. We will continue to talk about it because it is so important, and that people have the right, the perspective on this, not a black or white one. And again, I'm telling you right now, the experts, quote unquote experts, mostly I see black or white.
Yeah, so this conversation could go on forever, but I think that this is a lot for parents to digest. So I think that this is a good point for us to talk about, well, okay, this is a little bit scary, but what can parents actually do with this information? I would say, first and foremost, parents getting comfortable with the discussion, with the terminology, understanding again what the current terminology is, and not going in with the expectation that your kid's going to look like they're listening, frankly. Conveying the information consistently, regularly, having an open dialogue, having an open discussion, and ensuring as much as possible that sex is not a taboo topic in the household. That's going to be incredibly important. Another huge piece of this is understanding that teens have sex. It's normal, it's healthy, but it can also be very dangerous if they're not taught the proper tools and strategies to go about it in a safe and healthy way.
Right. And so just to reiterate, setting the stage, setting the environment where kids don't think it's taboo, okay, like the sex talk or sex itself. And again, just going back and saying to the kid, I'm comfortable talking about it, but if you don't really feel comfortable, please, here's a video I saw. I've watched a bunch of them. I really like this person. At least listen to them. And I hope that we can talk about it afterward, or maybe I can ask you some questions, or you have questions or something, keeping the dialogue open, but knowing most kids don't want to talk about sex with their parents. That is uncomfortable, as we've said. Okay. And again, I keep saying it, self-agency, right? Advocating for yourself, feeling truly empowered, not the lie that's being sold about supposed empowerment. And again, you started with talking about the male, female, the sex differences. We've talked about some of them, and it's kind of been implicit in everything we're saying, but we're going to talk about more of them in the next episodes about this talk. Just because, as you say, there's so much.
So since we are going to continue this conversation in the future, listeners, we want to know what your questions are. What are some of the toughest things to talk about your teens with regarding sex? What are some questions that you don't really know the answer to? Send us a message, engage with us on social media. We want to hear from you and help you through this really difficult conversation.
Until then, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.